Okay, ready to dive deep into Obadiah.
Let's do it.
Now, I know this one might not be as familiar as, some of the big hitters in the prophets.
Right.
But,
It's a short one.
oh, it's short, just one chapter. But man, it is packed.
Yeah.
Betrayal, justice, accountability. Like, we're talking themes that honestly still feel so relevant
Absolutely.
to us today,
Sure.
whether it's our own lives, like personally, or even like the global stage, right?
Yeah. And I think what's fascinating about Obadiah is how it uses a historical event, the conflict between Edom and Israel,
Oh, yeah.
to illuminate these timeless human struggles.
Yeah.
And it's not just two random nations going at it.
Yeah.
They were descendants of Jacob and Esau,
Oh, wow.
twin brothers.
Talk about like a family feud.
Yeah.
So, okay, we've got like this backdrop of sibling rivalry, which, let's be honest, I think anybody who has a sibling like understands that a little bit.
Sure.
But here's the thing. Things get really intense because Edom didn't just sit back and watch while Israel was getting attacked.
Right.
They actually took sides.
Yeah, and this is where the concept of betrayal really becomes central to Obadiah's message. Edom went beyond just, staying neutral. They actually looted Israel's land, captured their people who were trying to escape, and even handed them over to the enemy. So you can imagine this was a devastating blow. And even more painful, right? Because it came from people who, should have been their allies.
It's like that saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but taken to a whole new messed up level.
Right.
It makes you think about trust.
Right.
About loyalty.
Exactly.
Haven't we all been there?
Sure.
That feeling of betrayal.
Absolutely.
Maybe a friend who let you down.
Yeah.
Or just a situation where you put your trust in the wrong place.
Absolutely. And I think that's why Obadiah resonates so strongly with us today, because it taps into that really universal human experience, that pain of broken trust, and that feeling of vulnerability when the people we rely on turn against us. But what's interesting is that Obadiah doesn't just dwell on that human element of betrayal, right?
Yeah.
It introduces a divine perspective.
It's not just two nations fighting.
Exactly.
There's something bigger going on.
Obadiah makes it clear that God saw what Edom did.
Wow.
Their actions did not go unnoticed. And this is where we encounter this whole concept of divine justice, which operates a little differently than how we think about human justice.
So how is it different? Is God's justice all about punishment?
That's a good question. While punishment is certainly a part of it, God's justice is also about restoring balance, setting things right on a cosmic scale.
Right.
So it's not simply about retribution. It's about holding people accountable for their actions and ultimately working toward a greater good.
So there's accountability, but also this hope for restoration.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. Obadiah doesn't just condemn Edom forever.
Right.
It ends with this promise of restoration. The kingdom will be the Lord's.
That's interesting. So even in this kind of bleak scenario of betrayal and judgment, there's still that little glimmer of hope.
Absolutely. And that hope is rooted in the idea that God's justice ultimately is about healing and about bringing things back into alignment with his will.
Okay, so we've got betrayal, divine justice coming into play, and then a hint of this restoration. But what about Edom?
Yeah.
Did they just get away with everything?
Not exactly. Obadiah describes their downfall in a very vivid way. But what's interesting is that their demise wasn't just because of God's punishment.
Oh,
It
interesting.
was also a consequence of their own choices and their own kind of internal flaws.
So they were their own worst enemy.
In a way, yes. Obadiah really highlights Edom's pride and complacency as key factors in their downfall. Yep. They were so confident in their mountain strongholds, so sure of their invincibility, that they became blind to their own vulnerability.
It was they built these physical walls, but they also had these metaphorical walls up around their hearts.
Yeah.
Walls of pride, arrogance, whatever, that kept them from seeing the bigger picture.
And that's where Obadiah starts to get even more interesting, I think.
Okay.
It's not just about condemning this one nation for what they did way back when. It's about challenging us to examine our own hearts.
Right.
Our own strongholds that might be blinding us to injustice or preventing us from really living the way God wants us to live.
So even though it's ancient history, Obadiah is holding up this mirror to us, you know, our choices, our potential for both good and bad.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this little book so powerful. It's not just a history lesson. It's a call to action. an invitation for self-reflection and personal transformation.
I love that.
Yeah.
A call to action. I like it. Okay, so we've got this idea of strongholds. We've got this call to action.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how do those strongholds actually, manifest in our lives? We'll talk about that and more when we come back. These strongholds, it's kind of spooky how Obadiah just, gets us,
Right. I mean, think about Edom for a second. They were up in those mountains feeling all invincible, untouchable. But that physical security, it was actually covering up a much deeper vulnerability, like a spiritual weakness that came from all that pride and isolation.
So it wasn't just outside forces that brought him down. It was stuff going on inside, too.
Exactly. And that's the parallel Obadiah draws for us. We may not have those mountaintop fortresses.
Yeah.
But we build other kinds of strongholds, walls of fear,
right,
prejudice, maybe clinging to material possessions, things that we think are keeping us safe. But they're actually cutting us off from real connection, real compassion.
Whoa. Okay. Now you're making me think. I'm seeing some of those strongholds in my own life, that tendency I have to judge people before I even really know them, or getting so caught up in my own little bubble that I miss chances to help others.
Wow, that's really insightful. And the fact that Obadiah makes us do this kind of self-reflection, that's what's so powerful about it. It's not about trashing this ancient nation. It's about holding up a mirror to ourselves and asking, what are my strongholds? What am I blind to?
So, okay, if we're going to, tear down those strongholds, where do we even start? It feels kind of huge.
It is a challenge, but I think Obadiah gives us some clues. Remember how the book doesn't end with Edom just being destroyed? It points toward restoration, a return to what's right.
Right. The kingdom will be the Lord's. That line has really been sticking with me, so it's not just about getting rid of the bad stuff, it's about building something good.
Exactly. And I think that building starts with us being aware. Just like Edom had to face what their pride did to them, we got to acknowledge our own blind spots, the ways we might be contributing to injustice.
Yeah.
Even if we don't mean to.
So awareness is step one. Got it. What's next?
This is where I think Obadiah ties into another big idea, the day of the Lord.
Oh, yeah, the day of the Lord. Remind me about that again. It sounds kind of, scary.
It does have that side to it. It's not like a literal 24-hour day. It's more like a symbolic time when God's justice shows up, no escaping it. And not just for Edom, but for all nations.
So like a universal check-in, making sure everyone's accountable.
Yeah, you could put it that way. But the important thing is that this day, it's not just about punishment. It's also about good winning out, about God's kingdom being established here on earth.
So it's scary, but also hopeful. That's intense.
It is. And I think that's really important for understanding how Obadiah applies to us now. On the one hand, it's like this alarm going off, telling us to wake up, check ourselves, and get on the side of justice. But on the other hand, it's like this vision of something better, a world where God's plan wins out, where all the broken stuff gets healed, and where restoration is actually possible.
Yeah, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. But okay, real talk. How do we live this out? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the big picture,
I hear you. I think the key is to focus on what we can do. We can't just magically fix the world, right? But we can change ourselves, our actions.
What would that look like? Give me an example.
We'll go back to that core message of Obadiah. It's about opposing oppression, standing up for what's right. It doesn't have to be some big grand gesture. It could be as simple as speaking up when you hear someone saying something prejudiced, or choosing to buy products that are ethical, or sticking up for a coworker who's being treated unfairly.
So it's about those little everyday moments of courage, those small choices that add up to something bigger.
Exactly. Because what if everyone focused on breaking down those strongholds inside themselves? What if everyone started acting with justice and compassion? Think of the ripple effect that could have.
Okay. Yeah, I'm starting to get it, but I still have this one big question. That idea of restoration, what does that actually look like? Is it going back to the way things were before, or is it creating something totally new?
Now, that is a question worth thinking about.
Yeah.
And it's something Obadiah makes us wrestle with, because the answer might be different for everyone, right? And it might even unfold in ways we can't even imagine yet. But I think the important thing is to hold on to that hope, that belief that even in the midst of all the mess, something beautiful and powerful can come out of it.
It's amazing to think that restoration isn't about, hitting rewind,
Right.
It doesn't have to mean going back to how things were before. It's like there's this possibility for something even better to come out of, all the brokenness.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think it really captures the heart of Obadiah's message. Restoration's not about erasing the past. It's about transforming it, taking the broken pieces and making something new, something that's more in line with, like, God's vision for justice and wholeness.
So how do we actually do that? We've talked about tearing down those strongholds, making those everyday choices that, line up with justice. But how do we actually build this restored world?
Well, I think it starts with a shift in how we see things. We have to move beyond just being, like, spectators in this big drama of history.
Right.
We have to step into our roles as active participants. Obadiah is calling us to be the architects of restoration.
Wow.
The builders of a world that reflects God's heart.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
But it also, I'll be honest, feels a little overwhelming.
Sure.
Where do we even start?
I think it goes back to something we talked about before, that idea of God seeing everything.
Right.
If we really believe our actions have an impact, that even those little acts of kindness, of courage, can have a ripple effect, well, then we're empowered to, like, actually do something, to make a difference.
So it's not about waiting for this, like, big moment to change the world. It's about those everyday moments.
Yeah, exactly.
Where we choose to be compassionate, to speak up for what's right, to show grace, when someone needs it.
Exactly. And those moments are everywhere.
Yeah.
It could be reaching out to a friend who's having a rough time.
Right.
Volunteering at a local soup kitchen.
Yeah.
Donating to an organization. Doing good work.
And I'm also thinking back to our conversation about strongholds.
Yes.
How those internal walls can, like, really stop us from seeing and responding to the needs around us if we're going to be those agents of restoration. Don't we have to start by, like, dismantling those strongholds in our own lives?
Absolutely. True restoration has to start with each of us individually changing. If we want to build a world that's full of justice and compassion, we have to cultivate those things in ourselves first. We have to be willing to face our own biases, challenge our own assumptions, and just constantly work toward becoming more loving, more forgiving, more like the God we say we believe in.
Wow. For just one chapter, Obadiah really packs a punch.
It does.
Betrayal, justice, restoration, accountability. We could talk about this stuff forever. But I think for me, and hopefully for everyone listening, the takeaway is that this isn't just some old story.
Right.
It's this living, breathing message that speaks to our lives.
Absolutely.
To the choices we make and to, like, our power to actually create a better world.
And I think that's the beauty of it. Obadiah doesn't just leave us feeling lost and hopeless.
Yeah.
It calls us to action, to hope, to this radical transformation that starts inside each of us and then spreads out to touch every part of our lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Obadiah, I hope you're walking away not just understanding the book better, but also feeling, like, inspired, feeling that fire in your heart to be a part of something bigger than yourself. Because the story of restoration, it's not over. It's being written right now, and you are a part of it.
Absolutely. And don't forget, as you're going through your day, your week, your life, God sees everything, every little act of kindness, every time you stand up for what's right.
Yeah.
Every step you take toward healing and wholeness, it all matters. You can be a part of bringing restoration, bringing light into the darkness, and hope into a broken world. Never underestimate the power of your choices, your actions, your commitment to making a difference. The kingdom will be the Lord's, and we are all invited to help make